Welcome into episode 155 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
And I'm August Trometer.
iOS 13 hits today. We'll look at 3 privacy and security stories tied to the update, including iOS 13's built-in cycle tracker, Apple Arcade, yes, there is a security side, and remember last week's questions about location notifications in Facebook? It really didn't take long to hear more about that. It's new operating system day. We're diving in on The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. Well, it's that time of year. Summer's slipping slowly into fall. New iPhones are on the way, and a new version of iOS hits today as this show is released. This year, that time of year, has an emphasis on that time of the month. A piece from Business Insider highlights the cycle tracker accessible in iOS 13. Now, you may be wondering why we're talking about this here. Because there are real privacy concerns that Apple is addressing. Because, yeah, these are concerns that have to be addressed. Not guarding against possible overshare, but stopping the continued sharing of such information. The Next Web has word of a recent investigation by an outfit called Privacy International. According to that, popular period tracker apps used by millions of women are sharing sensitive personal information such as monthly timings, contraception use, symptoms, mood, and sexual life to Facebook. What a surprise that they're picking up on that. The piece goes on to say the data sharing happens via Facebook's Software Development Kit, or SDK, that gives app creators a full range of tools to develop apps tailored to Android and iOS. Now, the good news is nobody is responsible. At least that's what everybody seems to want us to think. The Next Web says news of the sharing has prompted women's health apps such as Maya, Pinkbird, and Grupo Familia to remove the offending SDK from its apps. Facebook, for its part, puts the onus on app makers not to break platform rules or misuse its developer tools to collect private information. But it's not clear whether Facebook has directly benefited from such data sharing in the first place. Not surprisingly, Facebook threw up its usual defense of, hey man, it's up to the users what information they share and developers what information they collect, which I guess makes Facebook the poor innocent that just holds on to every bit of information accidentally sent its way. I'll tell you honestly, sometimes I feel like somebody is gaslighting me. I know we've talked about this before, but help me out again if you would, August. Is it possible that this information is being collected accidentally? Well, I'm sorry, forgive me. Before we get to that, actually, what does the Facebook SDK do? I mean, if these apps are available on iOS and Android, is Facebook's SDK simply providing a way to share information? Is it providing a dashboard to access info outside of the mobile app? What's it doing here besides gathering too much information?
Well, the Facebook SDK does pretty much everything for Facebook, from logins to photo uploads and so much in between. But it also allows app developers to collect and share a wide variety of information, in this case, health data.
Okay, so then let me go back to the question I started to ask initially. Is it possible that this information is being collected accidentally?
Not on the app developer side. They're honestly making an attempt to store this stuff in Facebook. They're the ones including the SDK. They're the ones sending the data back to Facebook. But is Facebook still benefiting from the data? Possibly. We are talking about Facebook after all.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. There was a fascinating. It's actually not tied to this story that we're doing. It's tied to the one we're going to do later in Apple Arcade. And I ended up pulling it because it didn't quite fit with that story. But it was an interesting thing about how all of a sudden, back in 2011, I think it was, so you got to figure less information was being collected. All of a sudden, something in the Target app was seeing 5 or 6 things that was going on with women, or that were going on with women, and suddenly sending them information about, hey, buy this for your, for your baby that you're going to be having. And it was based on other behaviors. And a lot of times these women hadn't even told their families yet, hadn't told anybody yet. So the idea that Facebook would be doing this, I mean, this is now an 8-year-old idea, I suppose. Old enough to be in the second or third grade, by these terms.
and what's worse is that once these companies sort of target that birth date, whether it happened or not, they then sort of have a clock of what that child will be needing at certain ages. And then they start sending you targeted ads for diapers up until they're, out of diapers. And then it's books and toys and all of the things that a growing kid needs. And, next thing you know, they're sending you ads for training bras because they know the gender of the baby. And it's crazy.
Now, another thing that we have talked about before, let's say a tracker app or the Facebook SDK is accidentally collecting this information. How is there a place to receive it? I mean, I think of data being collected, intentionally as kind of like a round peg, right? It needs to go into a round hole. And I think of data being collected, accidentally as a square peg. And if there's no square hole for that data, how is it still being held on to?
Well, we used to think of databases sort of like spreadsheets. These were what were called SQL databases, and you had a column, say, first name, and that's where the first name would go. And then you'd query the database and ask for the first name of record 123, and you'd get back the first name. These days, there's what's called a NoSQL database, and it holds unstructured data, no columns at all. This allows for a lot of extra flexibility because you don't have to have a first name column. The database basically just stores a big old glob of data and can store whatever you give it, whether it's a first name or a date or when a period started, when the person had sex. So there really is no square peg and round hole in certain kinds of databases.
Now, I'm not big on giving Facebook the benefit of the doubt, but I guess what I'm wondering is it possible that the information is being sent but not received? I mean, that Maya and that the other apps are accidentally sharing these square pegs, but, I guess the answer is no from what you just told me. I mean, it doesn't matter if there's a square hole. It doesn't matter if they're looking for this information. They're just, if it's being sent, they're absolutely receiving.
Right. And, what is likely is that the data is being stored, but probably not being used by Facebook. That said, it's also possible that these health apps have deals with Facebook, and Facebook is indeed processing that stored data to know more about the user. To me, that's the most troubling possibility, in that there's something going on between these companies.
Now, the Business Insider piece that I mentioned earlier says information being overshared includes users' drinking habits, medications they use, when they last had sex. Whether we like it or not, I can see why an organization like Facebook, one built ultimately on selling ads, I mean, I can see why Facebook, wouldn't want to let go of any of this information, even if they don't have a use for it today. And I can't tell. It almost sounded like you were saying Facebook's probably not using it. I don't know if I misheard you or what you would be basing that on. Maybe you're just become a wide-eyed optimist since since last week. I'm not sure.
Like I said, you store this great big glob of data, but you have to have something that looks at it, figures out, what's where and all of that. It's not like Facebook has written some sort of algorithm to analyze drinking habits based on what these apps have stuck in a database, unless they have.
I love that's my favorite. That might be my favorite thing you've ever said on this show. It's not like they've done that, unless they did. The next web goes on to say the detailed investigation undertaken by Privacy International builds on a similar study undertaken by the UK-based nonprofit watchdog last December. The findings disclosed how widely used Android apps like Duolingo, Yelp, Spotify, Skyscanner, and Kayak automatically transferred data to Facebook the moment a user opened the app, whether or not that individual had a Facebook account or if they were logged in or otherwise. Now, obviously, Apple hasn't fixed all of those problems yet, but they have worked on overshare when it comes to women's health. Moving back over to the Business Insider piece, that site says iOS has actually had a reproductive health section since iOS 9 in 2015, but the piece says this information came through integrating data from other period tracking apps into the health app. In iOS 13, users can still fold the pertinent info from third-party apps in, though you're still at the whim of whatever SDK is built into that third-party application at that point. Still, with Apple's stated commitment to privacy and the steps it takes to guard against oversharing, Business Insider says a native period tracking app from Apple could be attractive to users who are nervous about the lax privacy protections offered in other apps. Let's look at something decidedly fun. Apple Arcade. No, we're not reviewing games. As of this recording, Apple Arcade isn't even open to the general public yet, though beta testers have gotten in a few rounds. For people unfamiliar, Apple Arcade is Apple's all-you-can-play game subscription service. $4.99 a month after a 1-month free trial. It launches with over 50 games, with over 100 games in development, and new games expected every week once it launches. Great for players, great for at least some developers, and probably great for Apple's bottom line. Also, great for privacy and security. Let me challenge you, Mr. Trometer, without looking ahead, what are some of the privacy and security issues Apple Arcade might solve? Just off the top of your head, seriously, no peeking, what kinds of problems might this address?
I would go with data sharing, of course, things like logins, emails, all of that kind of thing. Plus, the category of games can be a giveaway. If you're playing games for young children, then somebody can assume that you have a young child at home. In addition, Arcade can prevent the kind of predatory behavior somebody might try, like in game chats and that kind of thing. You also don't have to worry about a credit card number in every game company's database, databases that can easily be hacked. I'd wager Apple has a full-time staff which protects credit card information. Small companies won't have that. And finally, you don't get the sort of opportunistic behavior bad actors use when a game becomes popular. I mean, remember Flappy Bird? I wonder how many of those counterfeits were sold and how much data was improperly collected by, the counterfeit makers.
Gosh, I honestly feel like we could almost stop there because you just summed up so much of it so well. But I've got all this other stuff laid out, so we'll go ahead anyway if you're cool. Here's some of what Apple Insider's Daniel Aaron Dilger said in a lengthy piece on Apple Arcade. He cited the work of Scott Adam Gordon of Android Authority. Gordon has pointed out that Google Play is rife with video game clones and reskins, which Apple Arcade would avoid completely. If memory serves, stuff like that has happened in the iOS App Store as well, though, but and not with the same frequency. While that might lead to lost sales for the developer being cloned, the possibilities are conceivably much worse. I mean, it's what you just pointed out a moment ago with Flappy Birds or, Flappy Dappy Birds or whatever the knockoffs were, right? In his assessment of Apple Arcade's potential effect on Google Play, Gordon specifically linked to a story describing malicious titles in the Google Play Store that appeared to be benign. They lay dormant, then later pretended to be a trusted app requesting permissions to enable their latent malware to exploit the device. Google removed the titles, but they popped back up again from different developers using the same code. Again, that's not the kind of thing that happens often in the iOS App Store, as far as we know, but it's definitely not something that'll happen with Apple Arcade.
Yeah, there's so much that can go wrong when you download a counterfeit. And yes, the iOS App Store is pretty good about catching that stuff, but it's not perfect. Arcade is sort of like a private club within the walled garden. and Apple is the only one who determines what gets in. So it's a whole lot safer.
Now, this next one to me is pretty huge. Dilger says Apple Arcade's commitment to privacy and security also involves elimination of advertising and the surveillance tracking that optimizes the monetization of ads. Now, you may be one of those people who appreciates a well-targeted ad. I do know they exist. But do you want those ads targeting your children? Because that does happen. Dilger goes on to argue many users do not fully understand how sophisticated modern ad surveillance is, and therefore have no way to understand the risks that this unrestricted tracking exposes them to. Modern ad tracking goes well beyond just profiling users into various demographics to show them relevant ads. Ad networks exist to find cross-app and cross-site web browsing correlations that they can market to ad buyers. It was in that section of this article that I found the thing that I was talking about earlier with, Target advertising baby clothes to people who hadn't told anybody they were having a baby.
Sure. And it's the network effect that makes this so pernicious. Any sort of tracking for one app, I get it. I don't like it. But if you're using the same tracking across multiple apps, you can really develop a profile of a person, especially if your tracking is sending things like location.
Now, Dilger is obviously sold on Apple Arcade, saying nobody has to trust that Apple won't be making mistakes or inadvertently leaking its algorithmic assumptions about you, because the plumbing to watch what you do and try to monetize the exploitation of your privacy simply doesn't exist in Apple Arcade. And we didn't even get to the in-app purchase part because, there are none in Apple Arcade. Sticking just to the privacy and security part, though, Dilger says Apple Arcade's privacy by design highlights what other app platforms are refusing to do: respect your assumption of privacy. It's an episode of The Checklist, so of course there's always time to talk Facebook. We'll get the latest on them in a moment, but first a word about MacScan 3 from Secure Mac. Gone are the days when simply having a Mac was all the security protection you needed. Of course, you know that those days never actually existed, but we can't even pretend they did anymore. More and more people are using Macs, which means more and more hackers are trying to hack in. In fact, the number of malicious files for Macs has increased exponentially over the last decade. You need to stay ahead of the bad guys, and MacScan 3 can help. MacScan 3 is a great defense against malicious software attacks aimed at your Mac. It's developed by Secure Mac, trusted names in computer security and developers of exceptional security software for 20 years and counting. MacScan 3 detects and removes Mac malware, catches keyloggers, removes tracking cookies, and provides full-range or targeted scanning, all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your machine. Get the crud off your Mac with MacScan 3 from Secure Mac. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. That's MacScan 3 by Secure Mac. Your 30-day free trial is waiting at securemac.com/MacScan. Following up on a story we brought you last week, we talked then about Facebook's warning to people about warnings people were about to get about Facebook and its desire to track their location. We cited a CNBC piece that said that iOS 13 will provide a pop-up that informs users about how many times an individual app has used background location over the past few days. We also talked about Facebook doing another Facebook thing, saying, "Hey man, it's up to you what info you give us." Though we will still do everything we can to find your location. In its blog post on the issue, Facebook said you're in control of who sees your location on Facebook. You can control whether your device shares precise location information with Facebook via location services, a setting on your phone or tablet. But it also said we may still understand your location using things like check-ins, events, and information about your internet connection. And also, it turns out, who's standing next to you. A piece from Business Insider says people who downloaded an early version of Apple's next major iPhone software update, iOS 13, have started seeing an unexpected notification on their device. Facebook would like to use Bluetooth. Quick, Mr. Trometer, without looking ahead, why might Facebook want to use Bluetooth?
Well, if Facebook had a device in that location, or it had the assistance of somebody with a device in that location, they could then use the Bluetooth signal to determine where you were. Check-ins would be a logical use, but given that it's Facebook, I'm always skeptical.
Quoting the piece from Business Insider, for people who downloaded the beta version of iOS 13 early, the update has already caught apps like Facebook and YouTube employing data gathering methods that have presumably been in place for a while. One of these methods is to quietly tap into a phone's Bluetooth technology to track a person's physical location and their proximity to other smartphones. The piece also had Sam Nato, an interesting IT guy apparently based in Kenya, posting on Twitter, Facebook and most apps want to use Bluetooth so they can locate you even if you aren't using their app, and they can do it without asking for your consent. Pass. He also posted a screenshot of the request, which reads, Facebook would like to use Bluetooth. This will allow Facebook to find and connect to Bluetooth accessories. This app may also use Bluetooth to know when you're nearby. Hey, correct me if I'm wrong. None of that's a check-in, an event, nor information about my internet connection. Is that correct?
That is correct. But it does sound suspiciously like they're using Apple's iBeacon technology, which was developed primarily for retail. And it sounds like they're using it as a weapon. For example, let's say I don't want Facebook to know my location and I turn that off. Let's say I also turn my internet connection off. But let's say I've given Facebook permission to use Bluetooth. Now, if you are in the same place I am and you've given Bluetooth permission and you have an internet connection, your phone would sense my phone, then send a signal back to Facebook with my location, which I told it I didn't want it to have. Now, if you're at a pizza place, Facebook can assume that you like pizza and start sending you targeted ads based on the fact that you went to that location and there was another Facebook user in the room. All of that's really clever, but so evil.
Well, it's certainly underhanded at the very, very least. A Business Insider says Facebook tracks and amasses personal data on users' connections with one another and can combine proximity information gleaned from Bluetooth with GPS data to make inferences about their relationships. For instance, Facebook could log that you spent a few hours near someone else at a private residence and differentiate that relationship from other Facebook users you come into contact with, only at an office building. Now, the piece from the Next Web with which we started the show, it included something that Apple co-founder Steve Jobs said over a decade ago. Privacy means people know what they're signing up for in plain English and repeatedly. I believe people are smart, and some people want to share more data than other people do. Ask them. Ask them every time. Make them tell you to stop asking them if they get tired of you asking them. Let them know precisely what you're going to do with their data.
I'll use a different analogy. Technology should be like kids in the backseat of the car asking, are we there yet? Either you get tired of answering and tell them to be quiet, or you arrive and you say, we're here. And I wholeheartedly agree with Mr. Jobs. We should always know exactly what our technology is doing with our data. This thing that scares me about what Facebook is doing here, it sort of reminds me of The Dark Knight, where they turned all of the phones into listening devices. And because Facebook is on just about every phone out there, they're starting to get to the point where they can do that.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the part that I agree with is the plain English part. It needs to be it needs to be simpler.
Oh, yeah.
It needs to be simpler.
Yeah.
It needs to be stated very clearly. Because Facebook in a very clear blog post said last week what they said about, check-ins and events and your internet connection. It didn't say boo about Bluetooth. And yet here we are, a couple of days later, the day that iOS 13 comes out, after people have been using the betas for quite a while, and now we're just hearing this, oh, by the way, that's another thing that Facebook wants to do and how they might be using it.
I would just like to know how big of a rug Facebook has to keep sweeping all of this underneath it.
Well, I mean, we all use it. I mean, that's the problem. My Facebook usage is minimal at this point, but there are a couple of things that I do, other shows, things like that, for which I still have to have a Facebook presence. So, I mean, that's how big their rug is. Their rug is so big that you almost can't get away from it, depending on what it is you do. And then, of course, there are all the other people who are not security minded, who are not, privacy minded. They just want to, get on and, yell about the politics of the day, right? I mean, that's it. I mean, the rug is as big as the world, man. And that's kind of scary to think about, isn't it? While we wait for the rest of the world to either catch up with Apple's stance or, just fall off, Business Insider reminds us that iPhone users do have the option to turn off location services, including through GPS, Bluetooth, and cell towers for specific apps. And iOS 13 should provide a more detailed breakdown of which apps access which location services. Hey, if you're looking for more security news and how-tos, the place to look is securemac.com/checklist. You'll find notes there for this show, for all the shows that we've done, and you can listen to every single show there as well. Heck, sometimes it's just like reading along. securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you would like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. The address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.